Going. Are we live? Well, it'll take the delay.
They'll hear us regardless. Hello, everybody.
Hello. Okay. I got tripped up on the introduction today. Well, I know it's funny how things work. People are already I already see the Santa's reel posting. So, well, but this will be like a good sort of palate cleanser for to get out of the Halloween mode. So this is the Digital Archipelago, episode 17. Can't believe it, man. And we have a special guest, Praise of Folly, as well. And we're going to be covering some HP Lovecraft stories. That'll be another time. We'll get ZHP on another day. But we have two choice ones we'll cover. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about the significance and importance of Lovecraft in general, especially in regards to a lot of the sort of current situation that we find ourselves in. So without further ado, let's do a really quick introduction, then we'll steam right into it. So Praise of Folly, how are you doing, my friend? I'm sure a lot of people know who you are, but maybe give yourself just a little bit of a general introduction and how you got interested in literature. I know you cover a lot of Tolkien on your channel and so forth. But Lovecraft, what sparked your interest in Lovecraft? So.
Well, this is actually good. I'm doing great, Gio. So what got me started in Lovecraft was my dad read The Shadow over Innsmouth when he was a kid, and he got afraid to swim. And he said that he never read Lovecraft again after that because it was so scary. And I'm like, well, I got to read this. And the first thing I read was Call of Cthulhu. Oh, yeah. And then from that, it was just, we got to keep going. And so it all started because my dad said he was too scared to swim after he read The Shadow over Innsmouth. Well, he didn't remember what it was called. He just said there was like fish people that came out of the water, which is The Shadow over Innsmouth.
Nice.
But literature in general, I think that was just part of my homeschooling background. Reading literature like Shakespeare and Tolkien and all that stuff was heavily encouraged.
Nice. Well, we're in my cozy robe and the fez, my literature mode today. I was thinking of doing some spicier short stories, but I might be doing something with default that one particular Bataille story. But maybe next week we'll see what happens. But yeah, give us a general introduction of your channel though. What do you do mostly on YouTube? You're mostly a YouTuber, if I remember.
Right. So Praise of Folly, I mostly do. I have a roundtable every other Friday where I'm joined by Keith Preston, Swith and Dapson, and Terminal Philosophy. We usually cover current events. A lot of similar topics that Prudentialist covers. We also, I've got 2 casual streams on Monday and Tuesday where I just talk about whatever I want to. Wednesday, I have a show where I talk about the Church Fathers. And then Thursday, I've currently been doing some Middle-earth fantasy stuff.
Yeah, I was watching the recent one on Moldbug with logos.
All right, that's on Saturday. Yeah, forgot about that one. That's 3 hours each episode.
There you go. And but by the way, need those super chats, and of course to me, because it's my channel. But all of Praise of Folly's links and all of Prudentialist links are always down there. All of Matt's links are down in the description. So you could find him on, of course, YouTube, Patreon.
The nice thing is that we're all on findmyfriends.net.
There you go.
All 3 of us.
Yeah, there you go. So all 3 of us are on Find My Friends, so that's probably the easiest. I, of course, do have a link tree. And just last minute of shilling, I have an amazing, important article that came out yesterday. So Content Minded will be next week. It will resume. It will be another Gifts Ungiven one. So if you want to get ready for some turbo simping, it'll be there. But I did my super important article on the past 2 years in response to that Amnesty article from the Atlantic magazine. I even put that in there in the article, the Atlanticist. Oh God. But so it's really good. It also has some of my artwork in there. And final note of shilling, Prudentialist, you have a video from yesterday on digital deracination. And you have some other important stream coming up.
Yeah, so, it's the talk I gave earlier this February. Was given the green light to let it out so people could see what this was back earlier last year. So it's been my sort of like project of 2022 is about focusing on how to deatomize ourselves and exist more in the real world, not just digitally. So that's out there for all of you to see in my very speech-giving style of elocution, because you get to see the theater kid and the debate kid come out really easily. Outside of that, I'll be talking about deglobalization this Saturday, and then I'm going to have a couple of articles coming soon. I have one coming up that I'm going to make my priority, because I was recently asked to write an article for a publication that I'll let be unnamed for now, but I've got quite a few big things coming up.
Nice. And so there we go. So for this stream, I mean, I guess I'm the host, because usually Prude does in his channel. This one we decided to do the Silver Key, and I believe it's called the Gates of the Silver Key. Yeah. But I think we'll probably cover certain quotes from Cthulhu. And I mean, I read The Alchemist, and I read a few other short stories by HP Lovecraft. And I think like nowadays, HP Lovecraft is sort of experiencing somewhat of a renaissance. Although I would say that it's pretty divided between like the woke, like Jordan Peele type of people that are ruining his legacy, and far-right weirdos such as yourself. So, and again, huge shout out to my good friend, Zero HP Lovecraft, for helping popularize the legacy of Lovecraft. I couldn't think of a better man to carry on the legacy of Lovecraft. Because we live in a Lovecraft short story right now as we speak in this reality. So I guess let's start off with Silver Key. So maybe Praise of Folly, you go ahead, my friend, and we'll go from there. So
sure,
give us the general synopsis, I guess, before we run into it. Yeah.
So yeah, the important thing here is that this the reason why I recommended the Silver Key and Through the Gates of the Silver Key is Lovecraft is often well known for his scary, horrifying monsters, and that's the classic Lovecraft we all know. But there's an element of Lovecraft that is less well known, that of the dream cycle, with his eponymous hero, who is his own alter ego, basically. And in the Silver Key, it's basically the key of dreams, and it's the dream quest Randolph Carter. So Randolph Carter is sort of his alter ego, and he experiences some scary things, but rather than being marked by obscene horrors, it's a kind of very aesthetically pleasing vista, which is something you don't really see with Lovecraft as much. And I feel like that a lot of people have lost that. So the basic premise is the Silver Key is a heirloom, an ancestral heirloom that opens the door of dreams. And so basically he remembers that when he was a child, one of his elders said that they had a key that could open dreams. And a common theme in the dream cycle is that life is so mundane, horrible, and ugly that you have to go into dreams to escape it. And so he's like, yeah, I'm at the end of my rope, so to speak. And he wants to escape back into the dreams that he used to have when he was a child. Because, you know, modern industrial society kind of beats that out of you. And so it ends with him in this weird, like, time loop where he seems to go back in time and back to when he's a child and talks to some of the hired hands that his parents had. And then he goes and disappears. And that's how the Silver Key ends.
Very good. And so, Prude, your first impressions, and I'll get into some of the general, like the meta of it. But yeah, go ahead, Prude.
Well, it was nice that Praise of Folly recommended these, because I've read a lot of the stories that are, you know, situated with his alter ego, Randolph Carter, than I did really. I read Shadow over Innsmouth and his other works later, but I've read the Silver Key. I quite like it. It's different than, say, the awe-inspiring, mind-breaking kind of horror that we associate with that sort of upper Massachusetts, New England horror that comes out of it. It felt very much more of an escape from his traditional fiction. So things like the Silver Key or the Other Gods, and I think Randolph Carter's like longest story actually, I think, is like the Dreams of the Quiet Unknown Kadath.
The Dream Quest for Unknown Kadath, yes.
Yeah, thank you. And I like these stories more than I think I do the horror ones, because dreams oftentimes in literature, prophecy or foreboding kind of warnings that we see in other forms of fiction. But H.P. Lovecraft creates sort of his own version of the astral plane that one can access, which I quite like.
Yeah. I think what's very interesting is that when he goes into the backstory of Randolph Carter, like how he comes from an aristocratic line, I think that, and this is a good point actually. This isn't like some leftoid analysis, but the supreme classism of HP Lovecraft and the way that, I mean, looking up his quotes are insane, by the way. I mean, you think online racists are edgy? No, but because I think that it seems that what I mean by the classism of, and of course academics have talked about this, it seems that only the higher classes can have access to the arcana of another world, whether it be in dreams, whether it be in far off lands that he envisions in his horror stories, whether it be the sort of the lineage of Rudolph Carter as well, the way that he possessed the key. It's always like either the Far East or the Middle East, some Sufi or Vedanta tradition that has this deep arcane wisdom that has been lost to time. Only really the aristocratic class around the 19th century could possess access to a lot of these sort of not just sources of knowledge, but also like the cultivation that is required to appreciate a lot of these other cultures. Because, H.P. Lovecraft, he does always have the setup of the sort of either nebbish academic that comes from an aristocratic line, exploring different peoples, having like at the same time, of course, we all know his incredible, xenophobia, but at the same time, he has somewhat of an appreciation and respect that could only be accessed through an aristocratic spirit. So I think that is why, H.P. Lovecraft has a very diverse, in terms of the modern readership, has a very diverse in terms of the politics of his modern readership, because in some ways he's unabashedly celebrating things that of course are buried nowadays. And of course, in his personal life, he was also this way. You'd walk around New York and the northern states, and he'd comment on the even at that time the transmogrified population, to quote Peter Nemitz, the transmogrified population of America. So he certainly would not appreciate me as an Italian, as an Ellis Islander. Well, son of an Ellis Islander. He would, so he had very choice quotes about Italians. But anyways, yeah, moving on. So.
Yeah, well, the interesting thing too about the silver key. So he makes a really interesting point at the beginning, which is, again, it's Lovecraft's own words, because Randolph Carter is his own alter ego. He says that while he could not believe in religion anymore, he believed that the dream world that religion could direct you to was still useful, and that the people who rejected religion went to a lower level of existence than those who still believed in religion. And what he's trying to do with his character is sort of like thread the needle and be like, well, I can't believe anymore. That's something that Roger Scruton used to say. He used to say, he was an atheist, but a conservative. And he said, well, I can't believe in religion anymore, but I see the value and use that it has. And that's sort of what Lovecraft is saying in The Silver Key. And that ultimately, hedonism and the sort of materialism that we're familiar with now was even present then. And that it led to the annihilation of these higher spiritual, mental planes you talked about, Gio, the idea of the dreams. And the other thing that's interesting too is it's a kind of like almost inverse perennialism, because you have like the works from like the mad Arab Abdul al-Hazrat, who's Necronomicon. You've got Nyarlathotep, an Egyptian. You've got aspects of the Hindus and also the Tibetan monks. But it's all terrible, horrifying knowledge that you're not supposed to know. And so there's this kind of like, inverse perennialism, where instead of all the positive things that you can learn, this is all the horrible things you're not supposed to know. And if you know them, it drives you crazy. And the idea is with this aristocracy, this sort of classism, it takes a certain level of breeding and sophistication to be able to understand certain things that the people just won't be able to understand. And part of it too is, especially with the dream cycles, you just don't relate anymore to society as a whole. It's just you become so far removed. In some of the earlier dream cycle stories, the guy actually kills himself in order to stay in dreamland. One guy just overdoses on drugs and stays dead, and then the story goes on with him being king of some dream world. And so it's this idea of, one, you can't fit into the mundane mass society of industrial consumption and production because it destroys everything beautiful and good. And then if you have dreams through some sort of, aristocratic bloodline, nobody's going to understand you. And so life becomes increasingly impossible for anyone of an aesthetic spirit.
Which is a very interesting idea, though. The fact that there is an impossibility to the understand. Like I know, like in Cthulhu, for instance, like he does go down a lot of musings that are somewhat metaphysical, but at the end of it, at the root of it, it's like there's. Is that a mold bug mug? Do you have
It
that?
sure is. It's from Oren McIntyre.
Oh my!
Support your friends, people. I told him he should
That
update.
really threw me out of the loop, bro.
I told
That
him he
threw
should
me
update
off.
it and get the tap the sign as a mug, but this is like one of his earliest merch pieces, so I don't support him financially, but I bought it.
Man, that really threw me off for a moment. Anyways, it at the end of it, it's sort of like the sort of cosmicism of. I mean, I wouldn't say Lovecraft is a nihilist per se, but it seems that at the root of it, yes, there is some kind of metaphysical plane, but that doesn't give you any comfort. There's monsters, there's man-made horrors beyond our wildest dreams. But other than that, it seems that, but in this story in particular, there is sort of more of a sympathetic take on people who have that capacity for mysticism, as opposed to even at Lovecraft's time. This was written in the 30s. The world had almost become thoroughly disenchanted. This is, intra-war period, or right before. And did Lovecraft live to see World War II? Or
no, he died in 1936.
Okay, so maybe he was right about a few things. I mean, right before. It's kind of like when Spangler died right before the war, right? But anyways, yeah. So
no, but I mean, he lived to see the depravity of the Depression, and I think that's a huge influence on this, because I mean, the Silver Key, of course, is written in 26, so right before. I like the sequel though, which comes out through the gates of the Silver Key with E. Hoffman Price, because that came out in the early 30s, shortly before his death.
He died of cancer, right? If I recall.
I think so.
I don't remember how Lovecraft died.
Maybe I'm confusing with Rembod, who had sarcoma.
Let's go find out how he died real quick.
Yeah, but anyways, so yeah, this was right before the war.
Cancer. You're right.
Yeah. He died fairly young too, if I recall. He wasn't that old. He was, I think, in his 40s or so. Yeah. But he had a sort of a weird capacity to like predict things as well in his personal life. So, but yeah, that's the thing. I think like at the time too, like the social context, you would escape through dream and fantasy, and that it's sort of like it is a weird juxtaposition from the rest of his work. But anyways, yeah, sorry, go ahead, Prude. I believe we're in the middle part of the story now. So,
well, I just one of the things that I think that you had mentioned that I've noticed throughout his work, of course, is that you call it inverse perennialism, but I wonder if it's I don't want to say like maybe like an inverse xenophilia, where he's interested in what these, arabesque symbols may be or what comes from the Orient, but is also terrified in the same way that he can be in describing, say, the transmogrification of some urban centers of the United States, well before 1965, in his way of talking about, the characters that he encounters, right? Like, especially, I don't want to jump ahead, but like how the opening of the gates of the Silver Key come out, and you have this Swami character come in and, mittens and enveloping robes that are very much the sign of some kind of a higher sort of ascetic mystic from the East. And you see that a lot through here. I mean, like the Necromonicon comes from, the Far East as well. Names like at Tawil and things like that. I just find that particularly interesting, that this sort of like inverse Orientalism is well and alive within Lovecraft. And that's his larger experience than really anything that he grew up with in his own home. So, I mean, his inspiration, he turned to the East rather than anything that could be associated with the West, whether that be Christianity or older European religions and traditions.
Well, I will make one small correction there, Prudentialist. He is inspired a lot through the idea of his New England Puritan heritage. So, for example,
that
at the
too.
end of the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, the whole point of the whole story is that he's trying to find this city of vision that he dreams, but then he realizes it's the city of Providence that he remembered from a child.
Hmm.
And it's just basically him coming back to this realization of a childhood wonder. Also, Innsmouth, it's the sort of process of decay and degradation of a once proud New England city. And of course, there's the famous city Miskatonic University of Arkham. So, in that sense, it's not so much he's inspired by the Christian elements of Puritanism, though some of his revulsion we see at the immigrant groups and the horror at Red Hook seem to be associated with that. It's more that that's his rooted experience. His rooted experience is New England, and he draws heavily from that as well as this more broad Eastern tradition.
Interesting. But then it is funny how America does pivot to the East. I mean, Vietnam was about, well, this was, the Apocalypse Now interpretation. America confronting its unconscious the way the British confronted its unconscious in Africa and in the Congo. That was the parallel, right, with Conrad's novel. But I think it's interesting how the Puritanism of Lovecraft is interesting in that. I mean, I don't know. Would you say that sort of American Protestantism, especially coming out of that area of New England, the sort of the original 13 colonies, that there sort of is like a religious providence to America itself, that America becomes almost like a Zion, if you will, a new religiosity, a sort of shining rock on the hill. I mean, but maybe we make too much of this, but maybe that certainly was the idea. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not American, so that's not my place to comment.
I think that is the case. And what happened was, as the WASP elite died, I think a really good way of looking at Lovecraft is he's sort of like the swan song of the WASP elite. And a lot of the sense of decline and decay and replacement is the decline, decay, and replacement of the WASP elites. And it's a lot of their values, prejudices, and beliefs that Lovecraft, even if he doesn't believe in their God, still believes in and still carries on in his stories.
Interesting.
I mean, that New England tradition is very much alive. I mean, I think the greatest influence writer that anyone has in the United States, even still to this day, is Nathaniel Hawthorne, and to a lesser extent, Washington Irving. Because, I mean, the puritanical spirit, despite, not to say that it hasn't been diluted down. I mean, obviously it has in today's social mores, but I think it certainly has a long-standing presence within our writing and our fiction. HP Lovecraft is no exception to that, but I do think that he's a character transfixed from the past. I mean, one of his earlier short stories is about the what was his name? He did this story about Dr. Samuel Johnson as this like 200-year-old man who knew these greats, whether it was like Alexander Pope or Dr. Samuel Johnson. So there's just this American puritanical presence. I think that it does exist, but it's transfixed in a way that looks to the East.
There's another thing he did too, which is there was a short story which he writes about a road living in a city over 200 years, and the road basically is telling you its story of all the different people that walked on it and how the city's changed over 200 years. As that's that sort of embodied rootedness that he sees being lost with immigration and urbanization. And you also mentioned Prudentialist, this Eastern focus. We also see this with the Transcendentalists, right? Now it's odd that the Transcendentalists would have anything in common with Lovecraft, given that their social values are polar opposites. But I think that's where we're getting this Eastern influence. So, for example, even like John Adams was favorable to the Hindu text, the Shasta, and also we have, of course, people like Emerson and Thoreau.
Emerson is particularly,
who brought in a lot of this Eastern thinking to New England. And so clearly Lovecraft is downstream from that, even if he rejects their progressive social mores.
But it's also interesting, I think, that the role of reason in Lovecraft, I mean, you would think he's more along the lines of like the pragmatists in America, people like Peirce more than Emerson, but really it seems almost all Lovecraft stories share the sort of like the doomed, fated nature of man's reason itself, that, WASP, Anglo-European man in this strange new continent that it encounters, horrors beyond belief because of its capacity to sort of, in a Faustian way, conquer and explore and transgress over the natural world. It's like Lovecraft, him being himself an atheist and materialist, he still believed in that sort of residual lesson that is skeptical towards that. But also, I think like what's interesting is that the sort of puritanical spirit, it's not the sort of later manifestation of the declining years of the WASPs as a sort of like prim and proper New England, Hampshire, like Maine, young Republicans club with the, the tennis gear, right? Like that's like one picture of Protestant America. The real picture of the Puritans was sort of confronting this sort of dark and mysterious forest and confronting something much more ancient in the plains of America than, and I think Lovecraft very much taps into it. He does this in a very fantastical and in some ways, I would say, to be fair, like a very pulp, schlocky, pulp story type of way. But he nevertheless sort of reenacts an archetypal path of the Puritans in America. The way that certain, Cormac McCarthy in some ways does this. Who wrote the Scarlet Letter? Was it Hawthorne or was it someone else?
Hawthorne.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. So it's sort of like that sort of omnipresent dark manifestation within the land of America. I know me and one of my more controversial episodes of Content Mining was me and Zante, Mytho American. We talked a little bit about that, his own like American Gnosticism. I know a lot of people got pissed off at that episode, though. So, but yeah. By the way, see those super chats, my friends. Let's see if I don't know if I have any yet, but yeah. Moving on.
One thing I'd like to add is that, to your point, Gio, there's a sort of sense in which the boundaries of taboo have been removed by industrial modern civilization. And the taboo that Lovecraft is concerned about is the taboo of knowledge, i.e. forbidden knowledge. And he's sort of exploring the necessity of bringing that back. Because he says that, all of these things that you're not supposed to know, that if you fully comprehend, you go crazy, you go insane. Right. The scientific age that he's living in, it says, well, we're here to strip away all taboos. There are no taboos to knowledge. We can determine everything we want to know. And he's like, well, hold on, maybe, and he's speaking as an atheist to atheists. Maybe there are things that we shouldn't know. And as to your point that he's self-consciously engaging with the wilderness of New England like the Puritans were. We see that a lot because we'll see a lot of references to Puritans, to Cotton Mather, to revolutionary heroes in the works of Lovecraft. And also it's interesting too, right? Because on the one hand, there is this xenophobia, but if you look at say anything to do with the horrors in North America, so you've got the Dunwich horror, you've got the Shadow over Innsmouth. It's always these primitive, savage people that really know what's going on. Yeah. And if you ignore what they have to say, you're going to be at the mercy of these horrors. And so it's kind of weird. It's right, they really have the answers to these cosmic horrors. And the clearest example of this is in the Shadow over Innsmouth with the Kanakis, where they have the Elder Sign, which is a which drives away the fish people from the deep. So it's these ancient, primitive peoples that know the secrets to fight these old monsters.
Man, amazing. But it is sort of like dabbling in two worlds, right? It is a repulsion, but yet a sort of intrigue. And I think really that's a very particular British Anglo version of colonization, where they know that they are quote unquote a superior people, but yet they still have a sort of reverence for these folk traditions that they've managed to categorize and they've managed to sort of archive over the decades and centuries. And, very different than other forms of colonialism. But yeah, I'm trying to find a good quote here, but unless we'll move on to the other story. But any thoughts, Prude? Or
I think that they've got a lot there. I mean, in regards to the respect for tradition. I mean, that's just, I think about the British Museum almost instantly. And when you were talking about that every place that sort of the British Empire had stepped foot, there was still preservation of things that had been long since left in ruin or destroyed. And when they left, the same thing had kind of happened, and they asked for it back, which I just kind of find interesting. But the American forest, I think, is one of the biggest influences that you'll see, both in regards to HP Lovecraft, but also towards Nathaniel Hawthorne or Washington Irving. It's always been a meme that is still in existence today when you talk about comparing European to American forests, that by the time of the New World being colonized and conquered, most of the West had been thoroughly Christianized and civilized. There was the idea that we knew where we were going, the maps, the topography, even the historiography of some nations and empires and such had been kind of well collected. And then you're just transported to a world where none of that exists. And there are very much foreign natives and creatures that you have never seen before that are out to kill you. And what lies beyond that is this, potentially just, the very works of the devil himself. And you see that whether it's in the Minister's Black Veil, or you can even see a little bit of it in regards to Washington Irving's work, and even in HP Lovecraft as well, to where you don't know what's out there and around you. And then that unknown sense of horror very much is going to haunt you, or very visibly be there, whether it is in dreams or have infected the people that have now decided to reside over a place that is on top of horrors beyond their own imaginations that drive men mad or literally transform them into things that are unrecognizable, whether that's, of course, due to immigration or just, interaction with the land and things that are just unknown, and things that we're still finding out today about the nature and the fauna of New England and the rest of the United States. And I think that H.P. Lovecraft is definitely a continuation of that sort of European settler tradition of, you don't know what's behind the woods or what's behind the tree line.
Well, even someone like Ambrose Bierce with Carcosa, that also comes to mind, like the city that in the depth, I mean, with the Yellow King and so forth. I mean, that could also be a parallel to the developing American life at that time and sort of, 19th century urbanization. But yeah, I mentioned we do have some super chats, but I like this comment, but it's not a super chat. But this is by my longtime listener. Picton is an interesting writer and obviously smart, but he's incapable of writing sincerely, in my opinion, unlike Lovecraft. Everything is obfuscated by barrage, irony, black humor, esoterica. Well, is that why he's Logo's favorite writer? That could potentially be why. So, oh man, that's terrible. But yeah. So I think it is funny though. I mean, the criticism of Lovecraft is that he's basically like a pulp writer, and that it's like the setup of it is similar. There's always like the cosmic monster, and there's always somewhat of an aristocratic line, but yet I feel like in a way Lovecraft is not writing the way a novelist would write. He's doing something different. I mean, it could almost approach theory fiction. Like, because, people famously, well, infamously, a lot of theory fiction is not actually written from a literary lens. It's doing something different. But whether Lovecraft is theory fiction or not, I mean, that a lot of people would consider him that. But I mean, maybe if you guys could just comment generally on the writing of Lovecraft. I mean, people are, maybe because, he's become a sort of flavor among the political right, people are questioning his writing ability itself, that Lovecraft is just a pulp writer. He's not a real, novelist. So I wonder if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Well, one thing I'd like to say is that while in one sense there might be this superficial similarity to pulp, the cosmic evil is generally never beaten. It's something that's ever present in there. And there's usually one of two reactions that you find in the Lovecraft stories. Either the person goes insane, has this mental epiphany of the cosmic evil, and then gets sent to an asylum. That's what we see with the Shadow over Innsmouth, Olmsted's brother or cousin, who's put in asylum. We also see, though, the idea of using the ancient lore against these monsters, which would be the Dunwich Horror, where the professors from Miskatonic University use the Necronomicon to defeat one of these creatures. But it's not that you've only stopped an intrusion, right? That cosmic threat is still there. It could still be repeated in the future. You just won one game of this. The only time I can think of where cosmic horror doesn't drive somebody crazy is a story that Lovecraft has where the setting is actually a German U-boat of the First World War called the Temple, where the captain of the U-boat actually, rather than being like terrified, is ultimately seduced by it and leaves his U-boat and goes into this underground temple. As to what happens to him, we don't know. And then also a lot of these heroes are rather bookish rather than the more action heroes like you think of like Howard with Conan. And many of them are of weak constitutions, which is why there's this horror element, because the horror element is what causes them to break. There's not, some of them have strong constitutions, but a lot of them don't because they're academic and scholarly types. And that might be Lovecraft putting himself in the story because he was himself with a weak constitution.
Oh, God.
Well, the other thing, too, that I think is important is that people associate him with pulp and sort of like that dime novel, weird tales and weird fantasy sort of genres and publications. But I think it's important to remind people that, the dime novel isn't an invention out of like New England. It's not like this sort of brand of fiction or pulp fiction really does start as tales of the American West and the American frontier. Like the fantasy section, or what we would call, HP Lovecraft or weird science and things like that. That is sort of the dime novel or the pulp fiction coming home. And it has a much different twist and a much different take than, say, the dime store adventurism of Western frontiersmen taking on nature, taking on the Indians, or, saving a woman from a tribe of savages, right? Like, it's much different from where it is. I mean, the first dime novels are talking about expeditions into the West and into the Rocky Mountains back in like the late 1860s. It really takes off after the American Civil War, and H.P. Lovecraft really rises in prominence in the 1920s and the early 30s until his death. And I think when you read his work, I think it's important that you mention the Transcendentalist, because he reads a lot like people like Thoreau, or I think also more like Edgar Allan Poe than anybody else. I know that might be a hot take to some listeners, but I think about Edgar Allan Poe's story about like an airship. I'm trying to remember its name off the top of my head, but when I think of, Edgar Allan Poe and sort of his early science fiction stories of airships and, individuals that can deduce things based upon logic and reasoning, I also think about how that can go the wrong way. It's sort of subverting, these logical characters now dealing with things that they don't really understand. And whether it's Edgar Allan Poe's idea of an airship, I think of the short story, The White Ship by H.P. Lovecraft, this, transportation via ship just to these unknown lands that eventually, of course, drive someone insane by the end, and we never see the ship again. But the way that it's written, and I'll quote a little bit here so people can, I think, get a clue, because I don't think he's anything that would just be associated with, when I think of pulp or like weird science, I think of maybe L. Ron Hubbard more than I do H.P. Lovecraft. But here, it was against the full moon one night in the immemorial year of Tharp that I saw outlined the beckoning from the celestial bird and felt the first stirrings of unrest. Then I spoke with a bearded man and told him of my new yearnings to depart for remote Cathuria, which no man had seen, but which all believe lie beyond the basalt pillars of the West. It is the land of hope, and in its shine the perfect ideals of all that we know elsewhere, or at least so men relate. But the bearded man said to me, beware those perilous seas wherein men say Cathuria lies. In the sun anil there is no pain nor death, but who can tell what lies beyond the basalt plains of the West? And I think that's just, you can't find that nowadays, except for some of the best fiction writers that we've got out there. And even then, we're looking back to H.P. Lovecraft, Howard, and others for inspiration.
Oh, yeah.
I think to your point, too, Prudentialist, another thing that distinguishes Lovecraft from the pulp. You see, he's often associated with the pulp because they were the only people that would publish him. So it wasn't so much that he was a pulp writer per se. It's just that they were the only publishers that would publish his work. And the other thing about pulp that you see a lot is a lot of violent altercations, because you have like gangsters or superheroes or whatever. And then you have, loose women. And both of those are completely absent from Lovecraft stories. There are hardly any women at all of any capacity. There's a few, mothers, I suppose. But, there's not very many women per se. And then you have there's not much violence per se. I mean, a lot of this is all very psychological.
Yeah.
Now, and as to your point, there's a really good quote from The Silver Key, which I think highlights the point that I made earlier, but it also highlights his writing style. Carter did not taste deeply of these modern freedoms, for their cheapness and squalor sickened a spirit-loving beauty alone, while his reason rebelled at the flimsy logic with which their champions tried to gild brute impulse with a sacredness stripped from the idols they had discarded. He saw that most of them in common with the cast-off priestcraft could not escape from the delusion that life had meaning apart from which men dream into it, and could not lay aside the crude notion of ethics and obligations beyond this beauty, even when all nature shrieked of its unconsciousness and impersonal unmorality in the light of their scientific discoveries. And so that's his sort of criticism of the scientism of his own age.
Mm-hmm. Well, basically, the way that he, in the beginning of the story, sets it up is that dreams will always be more perfect than the real, that the real has become sort of small and brutish, and there's no mystery left to anything. And it very much, I think, is a good description of our own day and age, where fantasy and dream takes on this sort of supplication of the real. And the fact that like the key can deliver you physically into the dream. I mean, of course, preempting many tales of science fiction, even in film, that we have, whether it's the Star Trek replicator or a Videodrome or so forth. But yeah, you had another point, Praise of Folly. So yeah,
it's almost like it's Platonism.
Yeah,
because the idea is that Plato had said that the ideal triangle in this formal existence is more perfect than any actual triangle, but the actual triangles point to this perfect triangle. And this is actually, I think, a nice segue into Through the Gates with the Silver Key, because Price was a Neoplatonist. And so the great moment where Randolph Carter goes through the door and sort of sees all universes, all existences as one, that's a very Neoplatonist perspective. So we can already see in The Silver Key, which was written 6 years before, that Lovecraft is, at least in the dream cycles, is already setting up a kind of almost Platonism. And as a sort of, I guess, a brief overview for Through the Gate with the Silver Key, since Randolph Carter's been disappeared for a few years now, people consider him to be dead. So there's one Ernest B. Aspinwall, a man of Chicago, who represents the Carter estate and wants to sell it and distribute it to the relatives. And there's two friends of Carter, Ward Phillips, who's a scholar, and then Etienne Margeny, who's a fellow veteran of the First World War from the Foreign Legion. And this takes place, I think, in New Orleans or somewhere in Louisiana. And then, of course, there's Chandraputta, the Swami. And the three of them are allied against Aspinwall, who says that, Carter's not dead. Carter's just missing. And then the Swami acts in the name of Carter. And so he then says that through his study of ancient texts and dreams, that he knows where Carter went. And there's this whole elaborate discussion where Carter goes to this realm with the one who's not shall be named. He goes there and then he asks, for knowledge. And he's like, yeah, sure, I'll give you knowledge. And then there's these other like statues that were like other dreamers that had got there before. And eventually there's this buildup to where he opens the door. And what's interesting about this story is the sort of like God behind all of this, was it Yog-Sothoth, is actually not scary at all. Yog-Sothoth is, in all the other stories, this horrible monster. For example, in the Dunwich Horror, he's the father of the two spawn creatures. But in this case, there seems to be a different reality than the one in like the Cthulhu cycle, because the Cthulhu cycles with all the scary stuff. And that's where we have this sort of Neoplatonic transcendence, where Carter is in all dimensions, and he's all sorts of different species. He's other alien races. He's other humans, past, present, and future. And, this is sort of like we're all one, a part of this God. There's this interesting notion that we're all these geometric shapes that, if properly aligned, we would all see are part of this one larger geometric shape. And then from there, he has the key, And but the one thing he doesn't have is a translation of certain texts that would allow him to get back home. Because as Yog-Sothoth tells him, if he goes to other worlds and he wants to get back to his own world, not only does he have to have the key, he has to have certain insights of underlying formal patterns to follow home. And this untranslated manuscript is kind of like a map in this sort of like hyper dimension. And he doesn't have it, so he has to go back to Earth to get it. And he goes to this other planet with these like bug creatures, and he becomes a wizard. And then he has to fight with this wizard's consciousness to wrestle back his own consciousness to fly back to Earth. And of course, spoiler alert, he's the Swami, he's Chandraputa. And so there's this huge whole quite crazy dream cycle quest. The other thing too that's interesting is the whole idea of putting on a facade with the face mask and the mittens and the cloak. That is from another story called Whispers in the Dark, where it was written, I think, before this, and it was about a New England settlement beset by the Migo, which are like crustacean creatures from space. and there's a big reveal moment at the end where there's this guy who's got like a face mask and like fake hands, and it's like, well, who was I talking to, kind of thing. So it's a homage.
The man with the green gloves. Remember the man with the green. Sorry, that's a bad reference.
So it's an homage back to that story. And what I love about Lovecraft is he has all these homages to his own stories in ways that are not obvious. Like you have to pay attention. It's not like an obvious, scratching your back. It's like it's subtle, but you have to. But he's sort of playing a sort of literary game with you, right? He's got this vast lore that if you understand it, you can then see all of these other components in his stories that relate back to the lore. And that's sort of what's amazing about Lovecraft.
Yeah, but also I think the sort of Platonism of it. I mean, it basically is Lovecraft essentially illustrating like when you get up in Vedanta to like the level of Nirguna Brahman, like that's sort of like the all pervasive consciousness. There's this one passage then, because I know Prude, you really like this story, but there was this one passage as the Hindu, and he spells it with the two O's, the old school way of doing it, which you can't. Please do not do that on Twitter, or else you're going to get ratioed by people with the Indian flag in their bio. So as the Hindu pauses in his story, Hindu Twitter is wild, by the way. But anyways, pausing in his story, he saw that how do you say Menagely? His friend there, Demagerie, and Phillips were watching him absorbedly. Aspinwall pretended to ignore the narrative and kept his eyes ostensibly on the papers before him. The alien rhythm tricking of the coffin-shaped clock took on a new and pretentious meaning, with the fumes from the choked, neglected tripods wove themselves into fantastic, inexplicable shapes and formed disturbing combinations with the grotesque figures of the drought-swayed tapestries. The old, can't say that word, the old gamer word, who had tended them was gone. Perhaps some growing tension had frightened him out of the house, and almost apologetic hesitancy hampered the speakers as to resume in the oddly labored yet idiomatic voice. You have found these things of the abyss hard to believe, he said, but you will find the tangible and material things ahead still harder. There's a way out of our minds. Marvels are doubly incredible when brought into three dimensions from the vague regions of possible dream. I shall not tell you much. That would be author, very different story. So yeah, it essentially is sort of the sort of confrontation with the beyond, but the fact that you have people of a sort of higher type that are engaged in this from the East and of course the West, it is very prominent throughout most Lovecraft stories. But I do have a criticism. I think that maybe Lovecraft, they're trying to retcon him now, but it seems when you do have like lore building prolific authors in sort of fantasy and sci-fi, that it tends towards what I call like Redditification, where it's all about the lore itself as like a self-contained thing. It's almost like, it's like Star Wars will be like more Reddit than Tolkien. We're trying to Redditify Tolkien nowadays, but you know what I mean? Like they they focus autistically on the lore. It's all about the lore, and they're trying to do a little bit with Lovecraft, but Lovecraft's xenophobia is perhaps keeping them from fully integrating Lovecraft within the Reddit pantheon. You know, I don't think Lovecraft will ever be up there with Marvel, but Marvel DC.
Well, I think part of the problem with doing that with Lovecraft is, in many regards, a lot of what he writes about is still real things. So, for example, at the Mountains of Madness, he refers to Constantine and the construction of Constantinople. He refers to Orpheus and Lot's wife. He refers to Ulysses and the Sirens. Like, this is not just, this is not light stuff. You have to be a well-educated, well, as you said, Gio, an aristocrat. You have to be a well-educated man to read this in the first place. And so I think it sort of defies this Redditification because it's not completely fake in the same way that Tolkien is wrestling with real concepts, deep myth, deep lore, from our world, not just what they created. And so in that regard, I think that's what sort of keeps Lovecraft separate from that. But I think real quick, I love the moment of Carter's realization of the infinite number of Carters. There were Carters in settings belonging to every known and suspected age of Earth's history, and to remoter ages of unearthly entity transcending knowledge, suspicion, and credibility. Carters of forms both human and non-human, vertebrate and invertebrate, conscious and mindless, animal and vegetable, and more. There were Carters having nothing in common with earthly life, but moving outrageously amidst backgrounds of other planets and systems and galaxies and cosmic continua. Spores of eternal life drifting from world to world, universe to universe, yet all equally himself. Some of the glimpses recall dreams, both faint and vivid, single and persistent, which he had through the long years since he first began to dream, and a few possessed a haunting, fascinating, and almost horrible familiarity with no earthly logic could explain. Faced with this realization, Randolph Carter reeled in the clutches of supreme horror such as had not been hinted at even at the climax of that hideous night when two had ventured into the ancient and abhorrent necropolis under a waning moon and only one had emerged.
Paints a picture there.
It does. I mean, that's the thing, though, that I think Praise of Folly makes an excellent point to. Like, you have to know your history and also know his work to build off of it effectively, which, I mean, I think if you even write like the Silver Key or Through the Gates of the Silver Key, these aren't short works, and you've got to read them all. And the historical references that are put in there alongside references to his own work, I think sort of defies in a lot of ways like Redditification. I mean, every attempt that's been done to do so to either retcon him into or take away his own political appetites of the current age, do nothing but take the visage of a monster and nothing more that goes with it. They take the imagery but not the prose. They take the horror but they don't contextualize it. And I think that that's something that is important for I think people that that are concerned when people want to say make like Lovecraft country or whatever, and it's this.
That was like Lovecraft's Lord Demrangs,
it was, and it was just this wokeified piece of garbage. I think you're not gonna. I don't think we have to worry because they're gonna just call him a racist, and every time that they try to redo it, it's just you're fine. The other thing that I also think separates Lovecraft, and this is the reason why I think that one of his better influences is Edgar Allan Poe, is because alongside all of his works that we have here, we also have a laundry list of poetry that goes back to even before he wrote his first short story that featured any of his well-known characters or his creatures that we all know him for today. I mean, as early as like 1914 do we have his poems, and I think that's an important thing to realize, that he's also quite well skilled in that areas. He's not a he comes from this area and this time where you kind of need to know in a classical education to be a good writer. And I think it shows. Like he has like a set of sonnets. I think it's called like the Fungi of Yuggoth. And it's just I think it's like 6 or 14 series of sonnets that just go off describing these creatures on his own journey of eldritch text and what this creature actually was, and it builds in references to his own prior works in the early 30s. And again, like I'll pull one up here so we can kind of read it. But I think that that's another thing that people kind of forget is that there's a lot more to him than just creature.
Look at this
fish people.
monster.
Yeah. Right. Like, here we go. I held the book beneath my coat at pains to hide the thing from sight in such a place, hurrying through the ancient harbor lanes, with often turning head and nervous pace, dull furtive windows and old tottering brick peered at me oddly as I hastened by, and thinking what they sheltered, I grew sick, for a redeeming glimpse of clean blue sky. No one had seen me take the thing, but still, a blank laugh echoed in my whirling head, and I could guess what nighted words of ill lurked in that volume I had coveted. The way grew strange, the walls alike in matting, and far from behind me, an unseen feet were padding. Like, just classic sort of a Petrarch style of sonnet-driven. And I just think that I don't think you see that a lot today with anyone that wants to call themselves a pulp writer or be dismissive of that. And I think it's important to keep in mind that this man's volume of work is not just short stories or novellas or things that have been transmogrified into shitty TV shows or horror schlock.
Horror schlock. Yeah.
I what really disappoints me is like, if anyone's read the actual like text of like the Reanimator Herbert West. And then what's its legacy today? It's this like really cringe B movie. I mean, it's still great, and it's worth watching for one scene in particular. But it's a schlocky B movie with Jeffrey Combs in it, and that's about it.
Oh man! By the way, I wonder if Donald Trump. Where is it in the chat? Where is he? Donald Trump Gaming. What anime is that? Because I've seen this other account on Twitter that has the same anime girl. Wonder what that is. But anyways, yeah, that is a good point. Let me read you a quote from Call of Cthulhu. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday the piecing together of disassociated reality will open up such terrifying vistas of reality, and all of our frightful position therein, that we either go mad from the revelation or flee from the deadly light into the peace and safety of a new dark age. Wow, that is amazing. That is the bodying of scientism and the sort of belief that the sort of, I would say, faith in it. I mean, for those of you who are my patrons, and please go to patreon.com, let's share productions. Oh boy. I covered Why the Future Doesn't Need Us by Joy, who is a tech CEO, a developer in Silicon Valley. And he wrote this in Wired Magazine in 2000. He was talking about newer forms of gene editing and microcolony technology, the sort of theory, the gray goo apocalypse theory. And sort of reminds me of sort of that unshakable faith within scientific progress. And of course, he mentions Oppenheimer. And, I'm going to release a teaser, but I do realize that after record, I'll probably get it up by Saturday, the Walking Dead rant video, the Walking Soy. But I actually found some articles on it, some academic papers on it. But anyways, so it reminds me of the similar theme of how this sort of unquestionable faith in our omnipotence through science does condemn man, because when we do, put the pieces together, we're not going to discover sort of new knowledges that'll benefit us. Actually, we'll discover even more darkness than what is presently at hand. So it's a very interesting inversion there of Lovecraft's theory on science. But
I think that horror of science is still around, again, out of the European tradition of like, the full title, right, of Frankenstein is a modern Prometheus, knowledge that can come and also come with consequences. I mean, like, even the Reanimator is just chock full of the concerns of man's desire to conquer. Like, it's a kind of a Faustian critique in a way, where it's just like, the Reanimator tells the story of Herbert West and what he's trying to do, which is like bring the living, or that man is nothing more than a machine, and that it could be restarted in regards to defeating death. And so, like, there's a part in here that sort of just reminds me about, grave robbing in that film that was done with, what's his name? But anyways, like, I'll read a little bit here so you can kind of understand where he's talking about, like, science can sometimes be our own downfall or bring out the worst in us. It was in July 1910 that the bad luck regarding specimens began to turn. I had been on a long visit to my parents in Illinois, and upon my return found West in a state of singular elation. He had told me excitedly, in all likelihood, solve the problem of freshness, though an approach from an entirely new angle, that of artificial preservation. I had known that he was working on a new and a highly unusual embalming compound, and that I was not surprised that it had turned out well, but until he explained the details, I was rather puzzled as to how such a compound could help in our work, since the objectionable staleness of the specimens was largely due to the delay occurring before we secured them. Now I saw West had clearly recognized that creating his embalming compound for the future rather than for immediate use. It's just, oh, this guy's gone mad over his own desires and scientific pursuits. Things that I think just are littered throughout a lot of his work, not just in The Reanimator, although that's probably one of my favorites, and it's the first one to feature Miskatonic University.
Well, what's interesting too about Through the Gates with the Silver Key is I love the wizard Zakuba and the planet Yadith, where they go. These are like basically like intelligent bug races, which can and that's a common theme. Intelligent insects in the Shadow Out of Time, when you see the great race of Yith and they go all throughout the universe gathering in knowledge of all time. They talk about intelligent insects and fungi and other things like
the
that.
Reddit race, intelligent bugs.
and then they're fighting this group called the Bulls, Bholes, which is also related to the Doles, Dholes, from the Boneyard in the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadaf. So there is this like inner lore connection with the Dream Cycle and Randolph Carter, and it's this idea where you have like intelligence, whether it's in the form of a man, an insect, a fungus, or whatever, versus these primordial chaotic forces. And ultimately, because of his view of decline and fall, you can't ever really defeat them. You can defeat them for a time, but you have to run from them. So, the Yadithians can't defeat the Bulls. Ultimately, the great race of Yith is concerned about the flying pilot monsters. And yet they can't ever seem to win. It's almost like this sort of like inherent decline and entropy is manifested in these sort of monstrous entities. And that even if you could, travel through space, travel through time, have all the world's knowledge, it still wouldn't be enough to fend off these things.
Yeah. And how intelligence sort of enfeebles you in the confrontation with mystery, which I think plays into his linkage to madness as well. So sorry, I'm getting distracted. Oh my God, is that real? $100, Jay Ford? What? Oh my God, no way. Well, sorry, I usually do the super chats at the end, but my God, thank you so much. Oh my God, Jay Ford, $100. I can't believe this. Here's $60, $30 for you and Matt, 20 if you shoot. I'm gonna have to. Me and Prudent. Praise of Folly, gonna have to work out a plan here, but thank you so much, my friend. Oh my God, I can't believe that's crazy. That's amazing. But now I'm gonna be. Thank you so much. Now I'm gonna be distracted the whole stream. So,
but one of the things that I love
is J. Ford Peter Thiel. Maybe it could be.
One of the things that I love though about the Through the Gate with the Silver Key is consciousness. Right, one of the themes throughout even the Cthulhu cycles is that consciousness gets just torn apart and destroyed.
Yeah.
Now here it's destroyed because Carter realizes that he's got essences everywhere throughout space and time, and they just call him a facet, the Carter facet. It's no longer Carter the man. It's no longer Carter the.
He's
bug
a singularity in a way.
It's just the facet. It's just the Carter facet. It's like we've completely, just deconstructed his identity, his self. He's just a facet. Because he's a facet of all the other Carters, which themselves are all a facet of God, which is just kind of Neoplatonic emanationism.
No, but yeah, in Emerson as well, that's how he describes the divine. And for example, the essay on love, how there's sort of many manifestations of that one source. That's sort of like the idea. But it's funny how Lovecraft, like you were saying before in the beginning of the stream, he like takes it, but he like inverts it. Now instead of sort of the love of God throughout the universe, now it's sort of like just cosmic nothingness at the end of the day. To be everywhere at once is as similar as to be nowhere at once. So you're sort of quiet there, Prude. What are you thinking? Deep thoughts right now?
I'm just
deep thoughts.
Deep thoughts. Just listening.
No, yeah, but yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
The other thing is you've mentioned already that Lovecraft is inspired by Poe. This is a nonfiction work he wrote called Supernatural Horror in Literature, where Lovecraft is sort of giving the history of horror fiction going back to like the 18th century. And he does, of course, have a place for Poe in all this. He directly references Poe's story Arthur Gordon Pym at the Mountains of Madness, where he gets the phrase Tekalili. And so he's sort of even admitting to you that, yeah, I'm getting a lot of this from Poe. Not only Poe's style, obviously the style's there, but you're also getting like even inspiration for concepts where he'll just like write. I mean, because when I read The Mountains of Madness, I then read Arthur Gordon Pym because I'm like, well, how does this feed into The Mountains of Madness? You know, so again, he's a very highbrow guy. Like you can't retify Poe, you can't retify, Homer. He's in the Bible. He makes all these references in his works that you're going to have to read if you really want to understand them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's and the other thing too, right, is after this stream, if there's one thing that if you want to know more about HP Lovecraft, or if you probably want one of my favorite takes, Jonathan Bowden's talk on HP Lovecraft is probably one of my all-time favorite Bowden talks, because it's just the old American Gothic tradition, but also, ever constantly in fear of what is to come or what is to change, that still exists out there, and constantly trying to make sense of the horror that is unknown that comes with knowing things that you're not supposed to. It's a really good talk. And it was coincidentally done at the same time that Barack Obama had just taken office in the White House. And it was just definitely something.
Make no comment about that.
Yeah, no, but you should give that one a watch afterwards, because I mean, he wasn't just he's not just a fiction writer, he's not just a poet. I mean, he had written several articles for a journal had called the Conservative. I think it was by the Mortons that had originally had published it out of Nebraska. He had written articles for the Impartial Spectator, talking about the youth of today. He was a Renaissance man, despite his own eclectic lifestyle and relying heavily on his wife.
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting too is I know also on the list we had At the Mountains of Madness. Well, the first thing I want to say about that is there's basically 3 works that Lovecraft wrote where he deals with these sort of like extraterrestrial civilizations and goes into ridiculous amounts of detail about them. One is, of course, At the Mountains of Madness with the Elder Things. And then we have The Shadow Out of Time with the Great Race of Yith, which I already mentioned. And then there's a lesser-known work of the novella, which was published, I guess, posthumously in 1940, called The Mound, where he was a ghostwriter with Zalia Bishop, and he wrote about an ancient civilization that lived underground called the Kinyan. And they basically... So what makes each of them unique is the old ones are these basically spacefaring colonists, half vegetable, half animal creatures. They're very intelligent and they're very artistic. And then you have the Great Race of Yith, which can project their consciousness from body to body. They're like time-traveling librarians. And then the Kinyan are these sort of underground, decayed civilization that seeks to live forever, and it becomes bored with this ennui of ever increasingly degenerate entertainments. And all 3 of those are worth a read. And it's just bizarre how he came up with all of these 3 alien civilizations. It's really just, and they're so unearthly. We get so overloaded with Star Wars and Star Trek, where aliens basically look kind of just like humans.
Yeah,
and it's kind of like, come on, really? Like Lovecraft goes.
Captain Kirk had sex with them. So, yeah.
Lovecraft goes way, way, way outside of anything comfortable, which is why I think this is a sort of like, if there were ever to be extraterrestrial meetings, it would be like what Lovecraft describes, so utterly bizarre and alien to both parties. And that's what I think is so interesting about the Mountains of Madness, is it's equally horrifying to the Elder Things to be woken up from their hibernation. And at the end of the story, Lovecraft's character says, well, they're just like us. I mean, they're scientists just like us. If we had been disturbed by them, we might have reacted the same way. And it's sort of interesting how there's this kind of humanizing element where they're at first these horrifying alien species, but then as they learn more about them, they are able to then empathize with them, which is interesting because normally these cosmic others, well, the cosmic others aren't necessarily, in terms of these civilizations, aren't actually necessarily evil. The great race of Yith isn't evil either. The Kenyans seem to be, but that's a little different. That was also ghost written and was a sort of like side effort from him. But they sort of take his archetypal hero of the scholar, the intellectual librarian, and turn it into this like interstellar cosmic race, imbuing them with certain attributes that humans don't have in order to make them both familiar and also unfamiliar. And the idea of science hoisting you up by your own petard, that's where you get the Shoggoths revolt and start fighting the old ones. One thing that's interesting is when they read all of the, they're looking at the statues and the carvings on the wall that indicate the history, the murals that indicate the history of all of these people. Now, obviously, murals are not nearly as information dense as books, and there's no real way you could get that much from just looking at pictures. But this is my little theory about it. The Shoggoths were controlled by hypnotic suggestion by the old ones. So I have a theory that when they carved these statues and created these murals, there was due to their level of sophistication in art and craftsmanship, they built in this artificial hypnotic suggestion that if any intelligent race were to be able to comprehend what they were doing, they would immediately then download the whole information to them.
I mean, that's kind of suggested, though, isn't it? I mean, with the murals, right? There's a line in there about I think he says something like dimly sinister suggestiveness, which I think.
Oh, right.
So I think that you're definitely right there. Those murals do something to the eyes.
Yeah, that's a common theme, though, that a mural or some kind of artifact or some talisman can immediately, quote unquote, download in sort of a mystical way, like instantaneous knowledge of a civilization.
Well, I mean, historically, I mean, I just think of the Bayeux Tapestry. It's just one long, drawn out. I mean, it's on cloth, right? That depicts this in painting. But I mean, one long, drawn out mural telling the Battle of Hastings and the Norman Conquest. I mean, that's what my mind immediately thinks of. Like, I can look at this and ingest this entire story telling in battle of what came and what happened and how it ended for them when it finished. I mean, having seen that in person, that's its own hypnotic thing to look at and lose yourself into in the story and the detail and the writing and what is to come. One of the greatest things I got to see growing up as a kid. But yeah, I mean, murals, like you said, Praise of Folly, they're not as downloadable as books, but they do have a way of telling a story that is far more accessible because it's for us, right, as human beings, it's visual and most people can see
the motion of it as well, like in different tapestries and the work of art. Like, I mean, that's always a thing. Like, that's the debate between like if it really is the work of art in terms of aestheticization, or if it's something more, if it's something religious, or it's sort of an illustrative rather than the art object. But nowadays, of course, we have in the contemporary art world, like people appropriating the tapestry, a lot of these art hoes doing their projects, and crocheting with tapestries. But yeah, that's besides the point from Lovecraft. But
I think what makes the Mountains of Madness, I think, again, this will be the hot take, his greatest work. That's what I'm going to say. It's his greatest work because not only does it tie into real world literature and draw you in that way, he literally spends half of this novella painting this civilizational history of an alien race. Like that alone, absent the sort of horrifying elements at the beginning and the end of the story, is just unparalleled. Like you don't find this kind of just description over eons of time of this civilization rising and falling. It kind of has that Gibbon-esque quality to it, where it's like the decline and fall of the old ones. You know what I mean? I think he's kind of going for that.
Yeah.
And it's just fantastic.
How do they eventually fall? What was
basically, as there's different iterations because their civilization lasts like 50 million years or something. No, sorry, 1,000 million years. That's right. Basically, what happens was the last ice age drove many of them underground, as well as the appearance of the Migo, these like space crustaceans. And then they ended up being holed up in Antarctica. And as the Ice Age started freezing everything off, they went to an underground city, which in the water, which is sort of like, you could think of like the fish people from Innsmouth. They have their own underground water city. And so presumably those old ones that survived live in these underground city in the water beneath Antarctica. It's hinted at, but we're never actually, shown that. And in part, they also become too dependent upon the Shoggoths. The Shoggoths, they end up, it's like with any machine, right? You have this machine that does work for you, so you become more dependent on the machine rather than your own skill. Because at one point, they say in the story, Lovecraft says that they lost the ability to go back into space. They became so dependent on the Shoggoths and on these creatures that they created that they lost the ability that made them colonizers in the first place.
Yeah, very much like Gibbons, actually, with the Romans and the Goths, yeah.
But
probably ripped straight from it.
But yeah. I think this element right here highlights both the sort of historical acuteness of Lovecraft as well as the terrifying horror. So this is the end, spoiler alert, with the Shoggoth. So we glanced back simultaneously. It would appear, though no doubt the incipient motion of one prompted the imitation of the other. As we did so, we flashed both torches full strength at the momentarily thinned mist, either from sheer primitive anxiety to see all we could, or in a less primitive but equally unconscious effort to dazzle the entity before we dimmed our light and dodged among the penguins of the labyrinth center ahead. Unhappy act. Not Orpheus himself or Lot's wife paid much more dearly for a backward glance. And again came that shocking, wide-ranging piping, tick-a-lee-lee, tick-a-lee-lee. I might as well be frank, even if I cannot bear to be quite direct, in stating what we saw, though at the time we felt that it was not to be admitted even to each other. The words reaching the reader can never even suggest the awfulness of the sight itself. It crippled our consciousnesses so completely that I wonder we had the residual sense to dim our torches as planned and to strike the right tunnel toward the dead city. Instinct alone must have carried us through, perhaps better than reason could have done. Though, if that was what saved us, we paid a high price. One reason we certainly had little enough left. Danforth was totally unstrung, and the first thing I remember of the rest of the journey was hearing him lightheadedly chant an hysterical formula, which I alone of mankind could have found anything but an insane irrelevance. It reverberated in falsetto echoes among the squawks of the penguins, reverberated through the vaultings ahead, and thank God through the now empty vaults behind. He could not have begun it at once, else we would not have been alive and blindly racing. I shudder to think of what shade of difference in his nervous reactions might have brought. South Station, under Washington, under Park Street, under Kendall, Central Harvard. The poor fellow was chanting the familiar stations of the Boston-Cambridge Tunnel that burrowed through our peaceful native soil thousands of miles away in New England. Yet to me, the ritual had neither relevance nor home feeling. It had only horror, because I knew unerringly the monstrous, nefandous analogy that had suggested it. We had expected upon looking back to see a terrible and incredibly moving entity if the mists were thin enough, but of that entity we had formed a clear idea. What we did see of the mists were indeed all too malignly thin was something altogether different, and immensely more hideous and detestable. It was the utter objective embodiment of the fantastic novelist's thing that could not be, and its nearest comprehensive analog is a vast, onrushing subway train as one sees it from the station platform. The great black analog is vast, onrushing, front-looming colossally out of infinite subterranean distance, constellated with strangely colored lights, and filled with the prodigious burrow as a piston fills a cylinder. But we were not on the station platform. We were on the track ahead as the nightmare plastic column of fetid, black, iridescent oozed tightly outward through its 15-foot sinus, gathering unholy speed and driving before it a spiral, re-thickening cloud of the pallid abyss vapor. It was a terrible, indescribable thing, vaster than any subway train. A shapeless congeries of protoplastic bubbles, faintly self-luminescent and with myriads of temporary eyes, forming and unforming as pustules of greenish light all over the tunnel filling front that bore down upon us, crushing the frantic penguins and slithering over the glistening floor that it and its kind had swept so evilly free of all litter. Still came that eldritch mocking cry, tick-a-lee-lee, tick-a-lee-lee, and at last we remembered that the demoniac Shoggoths, given life through though and plastic organs patterns solely by the old ones, and having no language save that which the dope groups expressed, had likewise no voice save the imitated accents of their bygone masters. So here we have from the Bible, we have Lot's wife, we have from Greek myth Orpheus, we have Arthur Gordon Pym by Poe, along with reference to, trains in this horrifying ensemble. Like, where are you going to find this anywhere? Like, where are you going to find this anywhere?
Oh, yeah.
You're not. You're
Well, that's
not.
why it was the angels, right? I remember Common Filth used to tell that story, going around looking for angels to, never mind. That was a Sodom story, right? Lot's
Well,
wife.
she looks back and is turned into salt.
Yeah, the Pillar of Salt. Yeah,
but like that section encapsulates so many things. His skill as a writer, inspiring fear, a well-read man who can make reference to all these other themes and weave it all together so seamlessly. It's like it could have been real. That's the difference. Like, you read Conan, you kind of know it's a fictional story. This could almost be real. That's the difference.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, Conan builds off of what exists and transforms it into fantasy, whereas this could easily be the tales of fiction gone wrong or exploration gone wrong. I mean, there's a lot of people try to imitate this with sort of stories of Egyptology and the explorations that had came about in the 1890s, the 1910s and 20s, and so on. But I mean, nothing comes close to just what we had saw in its abject description, which really is, in a way, a lot of show not tell. But at the same time, it is telling you. It's just you can't get enough of it. I think it's just here's this thing that is indescribable, but I'm going to describe it to you in horrifying detail that is still not even scratching the surface of what this man can relay to you in his senses.
Well, exactly. And what's interesting too is I actually think that the whole point of this story, right, is to warn people to not go back to Antarctica, right? There's the Starkweather Moore expedition that he says if they go deeper, they're gonna basically bring to the surface these Shoggoths. And well, what's interesting, right, is we don't normally, Lovecraft gives you these kind of like cliffhangers where it's like, oh, I don't know, man, are we actually gonna survive this? Well, or will they heed our warning? Well, it's interesting. I think there's an implied understanding that the warning was heeded, because Dyer makes a reappearance 4 years later in 1935 in The Color of the Shadow Out of Time with the great race of Yith. And so clearly it's 4 years later. The world hasn't ended due to Shoggoths. Dyer's still alive. So I think we can assume that the photographs that he took in his story convinced him to call off the expedition.
See, all the more reasons why they don't want us to go underneath Antarctica, Gio.
Yeah, exactly. Well, according to that one Mossad agent, there's underneath there. Don't worry. The Austrian landscape painter is going to be there, and it's oh boy.
Unleash the Shoggoths.
Unleash the Shoggoths. Oh man, but yeah, this has been a great stream. I want to ask the whole where did that come from? Moldbug, the Cthulhu swims left thing, or is that older than or is that more of a recent invention?
I think he cites it in the open letter, but I don't know if it's him originally.
Yeah, I remember Warren had one of his first videos was about that Cthulhu swimming left, but I wonder. I don't know.
This is where we can just do a fancy Google search and find out where the swims.
I think it was a Social Matter article that talked about Cthulhu swimming left.
Let's see. People associate it to him in the gentle introduction to unqualified reservations. So let me see if I can find it now. If we can find an answer there, but
Cthulhu exists in non-Euclidean space, as usual. Bread mold. I love that term for bread mold.
Well, actually, no. Cthulhu doesn't exist in non-Euclidean space. That's where Yog-Sothoth exists. He exists in dimensions. When in the Call of Cthulhu, when R'lyeh is spit up from the bottom of the sea for a moment, there are non-Euclidean geometric properties to the island, but he's still on Earth. He's still underwater. And in the Shadow of Innsmouth, the deep ones wait for the day when Rilya will come from the sea to the surface. So he's still on Earth. It's Yog-Sothoth that lives in this other dimension.
Oh, I get this thing from Slate Star Codex. On Reddit, why is Cthulhu? People always worship Cthulhu that will never get his attention. Don't put the tentacles on the pedestal. Let Cthulhu worship you. Wow. Well, how did that term come about though? Cthulhu swims left. Is that just like the ever-present sway of like the history itself, or I don't know?
Well, I mean,
I forget.
It's Moldbug's form of historicism. His methodology of sort of taking a look at the sort of politics of the Anglosphere within the last 300 years is kind of how he does it. But that's also a criticism that he's received from just a ton of Marxists, but neither here nor there. I think that is his explicit, that's the word. I do think that does come from the open letter. Yeah.
Here's a good comment. Cthulhu arrived about 70,000 years ago when Schloss star passed through our solar system, disrupting nearby orbits. Cthulhu is an interstellar substrate independent virus complex that manifests in primates as contagious recursion syntax adaptations. Languages Cthulhu over ostravating languages and induce singularity to get an alien organism off planet. A timer ticking down to 0. When the timer runs out, when the stars are right, biological substrate will be sloughed off and the gibbering madness will spread to other solar systems. The only way to stop is universal aphasia, proto-language, but we're just getting infected again. Oh, it's very interesting. Does the language come up in Cthulhu? Very interesting.
I mean, language is all over, not just in Call of Cthulhu, but I mean, in terms of the mythos behind it, whether it's in a lot of his stories, whether it's Arabic-esque texts, unknown languages, just it's all over there. And the idea that these things are certainly much older than our understanding, and whether it's through the gates of the Silver Key or his other stories that he talks about, like at the Mountains of Madness, it's just like there is a sort of period of history that is long before mankind that we are only just beginning to discover the relics of it. I think that there's a lot that could be said linguistically about the history of these worlds that Lovecraft's created.
And the fact that you're almost like activation codes in a way. They're sort of talismans. The language itself is sort of linked to this exo-intelligence that manifests itself in time through that language. It's very, very interesting. Very Landian in a way. Very Landian.
Yeah, there's two stories I think that would really highlight that point, Gio. One, of course, is the Shadow over Innsmouth, where the Elder Sign, which is a swastika, can be used to defeat the old ones, the deep ones rather. And then, in order to defeat,
I wonder what he meant by that. This is a few. Yeah. This was years before the ostrich, so he didn't probably. He meant the Hindu.
Yeah. The Wheel of Dharma. He basically means the Wheel of Dharma, and then you've also got in the Dunwich horror, the Yog-Sothoth spawn is defeated by knowledge of the Necronomicon, where the wizards, the wizards, the professors from Miskatonic University team up and use this arcane lore to defeat this creature. And so it's interesting. There's these two kinds of stories. One where these intrusions are stopped and these creatures are defeated or contained or held off. And then there's ones where they're not. Not that they're, where the man the protagonist goes insane rather than triumphing over them. So it's not that they're impossible to defeat. It's just that you have to have the certain constitution and you need to have a certain level of knowledge in order to overcome them.
And he gets this as well from the East. I mean, he gets this. There are certain traditions within, for example, Theravada Buddhism and so forth, where the text itself is revealed only to initiates. There are certain sutras that are only available to people that are practitioners of certain practices and so forth. It very much grates with, I think, our like Western continental European understanding in the post-Enlightenment of the role of knowledge, being free and available and democratic to everybody. It's like that's, the vast majority of the world, knowledge was not spread this way. Even the vast majority of European history, knowledge was not spread in such a way. Knowledge was always gatekept either through illiteracy or through the various, esoteric literature and so forth. Even right up until the 19th century. I mean, you did have, Lovecraft was acquainted with all of them. And a lot of them were charlatans, let's face it. A lot of these, mystery schools going around first in Europe and then America, a lot of the spiritualist movements and so forth. Lovecraft, like Edgar Allan Poe, was very much in this environment. A lot of them were charlatans, but, a lot of them were snake oil salesmen. But like nowadays. So, yeah.
Well, the other thing that I think that it's important is that also echoes back to you requiring to be an aristocrat is that if you were somehow someone that survived and didn't know what happened or had an idea, like regular ordinary people are just going to lose themselves to whatever unknown or eldritch horror that is going to befall them. I mean, just the description of just how, like in the poem, Nyarlathotep comes in, this Egyptian god looking like an old native blood of looking like a pharaoh. Everyone knelt right and saw him, and he had risen up after 27 centuries of slumber. And unless you know, right, or if you don't know, then you're going to watch the town go for it and lose themselves to these beings. I mean, like he had said in the opening of the poem, I am the last, I will tell the audient void. And if you don't have this ancient knowledge with you, and if you're not historically well read, and if you don't know the esoterica of human history and biblical tales, then you will lose yourself to any such madness that may come.
Yeah.
There's another good story of where you could say there's like a white magic magician who overcomes. The case of Charles Dexter Ward, where Charles Dexter Ward's family physician sort of learns this esoteric knowledge as well and is able to defeat an evil wizard. But this quote here is just choice for just the bizarre absurdities of Lovecraft. So this is the family physician going into this underground laboratory to find all these things, and he's looking into a pit. What the thing was, he would never tell. It was something. It was like some of the carvings on the hellish altar, but it was alive. Nature had never made it in this form, for it was too palpably unfinished. The deficiencies were the most surprising sort, and the abnormalities of proportion could not be described. Willett consents only to say that this type of thing must have represented entities which Ward called upon from imperfect salts, and which he kept for servile and ritualistic purposes. Like, what is that? What did I just read? What is that? Oh, man.
No, Lovecraft would not be Koliak if he was alive today, because Lovecraft hated women. So that would be that would grate with their Hyperborean feminism. No, I don't know. Did Lovecraft hate women? I don't know. Was he a misogynist?
I mean, he was married briefly, of all things, to a Jewess, but it didn't work out, and they ended up divorcing.
Oh, of course. But that it's maybe, who knows? That Lovecraft did. No, that quote though, it is HP Craft. I love when certain people of a certain persuasion find zero HP Lovecraft's tweets. They always break out zero pussy Lovecraft every time without fail, zero pussy Lovecraft over and over and over again. Even though I believe ZHP's married though. So and he designed Candy Crush, by the way. So that is also a man-made horror. That's just a rumor. He designed Candy Crush, but I mean, wouldn't it be ironic though if ZHP designed Candy Crush? That would be amazing.
If there was ever a reason to take up the mantle and talk about the technological horrors of today, it would be him
enslaving people. Yeah.
I've designed a way that a technological elder god that sucks brains out of people, and lo and behold, I now write about it. And this is why you should get in the pod and sacrifice yourself for the Green New Deal.
For the gig economy. Yeah. By the way, he recently had his WordPress nuked.
Yeah, so everything's going up on his Substack now. It's a real shame.
There's only a few people that have ever gotten nuked from WordPress. Jay Dyer and now ZHP. But he republished the post left story or the art right story. You know, where they're all like in the gallery and it's hosted by Anna Kachayan. And I was so pissed that he didn't write me into that story. That he didn't write me into the Dime Square art right Moldbug gala. You know, I could have been there. Could have been. You know, he wrote Cat in it, but not me. So I'm offended. Speaking of which, I guess before we go to super chats, you know, this has been a good stream. Speaking of man-made horrors, what do you guys think of Millions Must Lose Weight? There you go. Speaking of ZHP, that was his alter ego, Zero Willis Carlito. Oh boy. Things have been crazy lately though. Things have been last week was insane. You know, I was gonna say Lovecraft. Herr Fuhrer Musk taking over the Heaven site and you know, the ban wave. It's just, I don't know, things have been insane lately. So yeah.
Well, one thing before we do go, or before we wrap up, I did want to also talk a little bit about the Shadow over Innsmouth, because that's the classic Lovecraft where he goes into the fears of miscegenation. And the idea of the mixing with the fish. Yeah, the mixing with the fish. And one of the things that's interesting is this one is
Mermaid got me acting strange.
Is complete with biblical allusions, right? Almost all the Innsmouth folk have some kind of Bible name, you know, Obed Marsh, or you know, all of these things, right?
I think he references the Tower of Babel as well in it.
There's all sorts of these biblical references throughout. And of course, Dagon, which is the Philistine god of the sea, is sort of like this chief deity of the fish people. There's a separate story called Dagon, which is a short story, not a novella. But the interesting thing about it is how people sort of rationalize things away, right? So in 1846, when the deep ones came out of the sea and took everybody away, that's all rationalized as an epidemic. Innsmouth got hit by an epidemic. The turning into a fish and, you know, being secluded, the rest of the world views that as just some sort of a congenital skin disease. The city keeps on declining and degrading after the War of 1812.
Fish pox.
And then people are like, well, what is this? And there's all these, you know, interesting ways of like getting away from the horror of the obvious. You know, the submarine attack on Devil's Reef. Oh, there's just, you know, this whiskey bros. It's just bootleg whiskey. Don't worry about it. No unnatural creatures down there. Just bootleg whiskey we were taking out. And the whole thing is just like, we can't say what it is. And all of these very creative lengths that they'll go to in order to do that, to get away from that, is great. And of course, the protagonist is himself a fish person. He doesn't know it yet. And it's that terror of realization that not just the terror of being captured because he fears he's going to be captured in the hotel, but it's the terror of realization that he is one of those things. But then he comes to accept it. So it's a very interesting story. I think probably one of the most interesting parts of it is Zadok Allen's monologue. He gets all liquored up, and then he just, you know, talks about everything for the last 100 years of the history.
Oh man, that's so good. The way that the outsiders are trying to explain things, like he just gets him liquored up, and he's just basically like, yeah, the children born since 46 begun to grow up. Some of them, that is. I was afraid never did no prying after that awful night. Just describing how, like, the rest of the world, talking about like outsiders, you know, folks outside have their stories about us. You know, you've heard plenty of them, seeing the questions that get asked, stories about things they've seen every now and then, about the queer jewelry that still comes from somewheres. Ain't all quite that melted up, but nothing gets as definite. Nobody ill behaving, yet they call gold-like things prairie loot and allow the Innsmouth folks has furrin up blood or distempered or something. Besides them that lives off here, show as many strangers they can and encourage the rest of us not to get very curious, especially around railroad nighttime. Beasts balk at critters, hussing up Wussel muzzles and got them autos that was all up night. And then he just tells the story over and over about people getting with the fish people, the outsiders, like the government during the Civil War just stops drafting people from this place. It's wild.
Because they could be fish people.
I love the way he describes the tiara. He says, "The longer I looked, the more the thing fascinated me. And in this fascination, there was a curious, disturbing element hardly to be classified or accounted for. At first, I decided that it was the queer, otherworldly quality of the art which made me uneasy. All other art objects I'd ever seen either belonged to some known racial or national stream, or else were consciously modernistic defiances of every recognized stream. The tiara was neither. It clearly belonged to some subtle technique of infinite maturity and perfection, yet that technique was utterly remote from any Eastern or Western, ancient or modern, which I had ever heard of or seen exemplified. It was as if the workmanship were that of another planet." Like, wow. Just wow.
Man. I'm looking up images of the artist rendition of the fish people. That's crazy. Why would you never
like that? I feel like that's something that should go with the tagline, "Do not research."
Do not research. Why would you have sex with
this sort of also ties back in. This sort of ties back into his Puritan background, because again, he's going to be well steeped in biblical tradition and knowledge, and so for him to have Dagon, this ancient enemy of the Hebrews, be personified as this monster, and then all these fish spawn, mixing with the fish spawn. I think you can go a little bit deeper, right? The New England Puritans viewed themselves as the new Israel, and they were in Israel in the Old Testament was prescribed from intermixing with the Canaanites. Well, this is sort of like a Canaanite revenge on the new Israel, where they're mixing with them and dragging them into the sea.
Man, so they're literally inshallah, we shall push them into the sea, like literally. Oh god. Oh, that's terrible.
And you'll push them into the sea with swastikas, Gio.
No. Well, did you know during World War II, the Arabs and never mind. That was such a neocon talking point back in the day. Do you remember?
Oh yeah.
Where it was like, oh, the Arabs sided with the Austrian painter, and it's like, the whole. Well, often in the digital archipelago, we always go down memory lane to the 2000s, right? So.
Oh, way too often.
Yeah. Way too often. Yeah. But America as a new Zion, I mean, that's a very interesting idea.
Well,
it's
new
kind of like
Israelism isn't particularly just like restrained to the British. I mean, it had definitely had its explosive idea that each like new vassal in Western Christendom could be something, right? Like the Spanish had like the Rex Catholicismus, the most Catholic king. The French were the Fille de l'Anglise, like the first daughter of the church.
Even Russia, the Third Rome idea.
Yeah, I mean, has tried to be the inheritor of what is to be the new Israel since Christ's resurrection, and you see it now. I think, especially with like the Anabaptist puritanical view of things, that we're going to leave in fact. Oh yeah, I mean Zion for them especially, right? You see it all over. That has been this sort of desire to create it, and I think that you see that most prominently in the Shadow over Innsmouth.
Did you? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just say real quick. Lovecraft also wrote a short story, "The History of the Necronomicon," and I love this. What he says about one of the Abdul Hazrad. He is said by Ibn Khaldun to have been seized by an invisible monster in broad daylight and devoured horribly before a large number of frozen witnesses. Like, whoa, what?
It's like everyone thought Nick Land was being butchered in a Chinese wet market, but now he's back on Twitter. So.
Oh
man! Someone clipped that on YouTube.
Someone had tweeted that out where it was just like your favorite accelerationist is now a Chinese delicacy.
What a fitting end to Nick Land, though. What a fitting end. Yeah, they're still going with that third row. Well, I believe they are the third row in my opinion. Oh, I shouldn't say that online, but anyways, sorry, that's just the Daily Vatnik posting. But yeah, this has been a great stream, boys. I don't know if you want to talk about contemporary politics, but probably not. I don't know. Maybe yay, maybe yay.
Talk about what? Sorry.
contemporary events. But before we head off,
Sure.
yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think of the whole Twitter thing? I mean, I don't think much will change, to tell you the truth. I hate to be blackpilled, but I mean, I'm symbolically. I know Musk is trolling AOC. That's pretty cool.
I think the way that this is working is that with the elites in charge, there's different wings. And
Yeah.
I think okay, think of this. Imagine like in a classic villain film and one of the minions of the villain fails and the villain sacks him because he's like, hey, look, you're not supposed to actually fail. You're not supposed to mess this up, you know? I'm going to have someone else replace you, and then usually gets, killed. I think what ended up happening is the woke element went a little too far, and they're like, you weren't supposed to go that far. You've turned, so many people against us. We need to have one of our guys come in and then walk it back to the middle a little bit. That's what I think is going on. They're walking it back to the middle because a lot of these woke people went way too far. I mean, they got rid of the president of the United States. That's a little too far.
Symbolically getting rid of Vijaya, what's her last name? I love how her name is Vijaya too. Like which means wisdom, or I forget if it's one of the iterations of wisdom in Hindi. But no, like getting rid of her, I think, is a symbolic victory. But it's just that. I mean, because she was the one that greenlit getting Orange Tiny Hands off of Twitter. So my buddy Goran thinks from my buddy GSP on the War Report podcast, go to my good friend Constantine Martelli's channel. In his latest episode, he thinks that essentially it's a move towards gladio conservatism, in that they're going to sort of symbolically give the American right a marginal victory, but they're going to really drum up propaganda for the blue yellow country and potentially getting people prepped for, like, because essentially his idea is that they want the political right involved in America. They want gladio nationalism, gladio conservatism, that instead of the leftoids, the NAFO people that aren't going to particularly make good soldiers if worse comes to worse. So I wonder if that's like a crazy 5D chess idea, but I mean, I think like I don't know though. I don't know. I think that couldn't work because now that in American discourse, support for the blue yellow country is coded with like the NAFO neoliberal people, not the right. I mean, but who knows? In Europe definitely, like the European New Right completely sold themselves out to the blue yellow, to gladio nationalism. So I think they want American right wingers prepped with the idea of like a Greg Johnson type of thing. So they're giving them this symbolic victory of like, well, you're not going to be able to post gamer words ever again on Twitter. That's not going to happen. But maybe you won't get banned. You won't have to come back on your 15th burner account. I don't know. I mean, that's a crazy idea, but
no, I actually think that's a pretty reasonable inference, because you're not going to have a bunch of like rainbow soy jacks fighting, WW3 in Eastern Europe. You're going to have to get the guys that would do that invested.
Yeah.
And I think that, broadly speaking, that's what they want. They want to get middle America invested back into the flag waving American imperialism. Now, I guess then the question is this the avenue they're going to take? Maybe not. But I think
he also said that military commercials recently have been less highlighting BIPOC LGBT people. That's going back to like those 2000s military commercials, like the one I mentioned all the time that had Godsmack on it. That one, accelerate your life. Yeah, it had the Godsmack song on. They're going back to that older style of like military wife. Like, yeah, they have to throw in girl bosses in these commercials, but they're going back to like American heart, or at least trying to appeal to the American heartland, because apparently recruitment is like, oh my God, it's abysmal now in the American military.
So last I checked, except for the Marines, all the other services are down like 75%.
Yeah.
The Marines are only down 50%. But it's massive. Only 50. Yeah. So it's massively down. And gee, I wonder why.
Yeah.
I think also mandatory coof shots haven't helped either.
Yeah, that's another thing. The sacrament. Well, Prude, you know about the recruitment numbers. They're like abysmal.
Oh, I mean, they're abysmal, as Praise of Folly just mentioned. I mean, but this has been the other issue though too, is that the military has been sort of subtly trying to lack standards, whether that's in physical fitness, whether that's within tattoos are a thing, your prior record is a thing, your just trying to get people to sign up and join doesn't work when the people that you're used to recruiting, which is sort of middle America flyover country, has been the case. I mean, consider the fact that someone had done the stats after we had left Afghanistan, that it said that like 86% of all wartime fatalities in Afghanistan were straight white Christian men. And it's just like, well, maybe, especially in this current conflict, especially between physical fitness and obesity. I mean, that's been a national security issue from the Joint Chiefs and the Pentagon for decades now, has been the pandemic of obesity in the United States, to where like really you only have like a quarter of like all fighting age men in the United States that would be like not fat enough to be turned into warfighting shape. That's a huge national security concern. I think you're seeing a lot of this lately too, not just from the right, but just in general, where they're trying to make the current conflict this like really big bastion rah for the idea of what is Western liberal democracy.
Yeah, Millie said this. It's literally the death of democracy.
I covered it last week on the show, where I was just reading Francis Fukuyama and Richard Hanania basically say like there is no other alternative except
Turbo America,
except for Turbo American liberal democracy, which is the ultimate stretching of the definition of liberal democracy, when by force you're jailing political opposition, and but neither here nor there. I think that they're trying to create a more softer image than the I don't know how well it will work still, because America's so politically polarized now, and that even a lot of mainstream Republicans are just like, maybe we should cut this age shit, like how much is too much. So I don't know. I think that's what they're going to try and push. They're going to go really hard for it, but I think that it's kind of become glaringly obvious that, like, even the Washington Post earlier I think it was earlier this week or last week, they were like, the United States government has only managed to do like 10% of weapons inspections for all that's been shipped over there. And like, there's been reports of like weapons from Sweden that have not gotten to the correct hands, which that eerily feels reminding me of what happened in Syria and the circa 2012, 2013, where weapons and arms shipments from the West magically end up in the hands of the wrong types of people. So we're moving in a direction where it's going to turn into, instead of Assad must go, it must be, Putler must go. And except Putler has nuclear weapons, which makes this all the more dangerous. Yeah.
And the fact that they're willing to risk it. I mean, these people are such ingrates. I mean, I posted on my Telegram this post. It's funny, the certain segments of political left now in America, they're starting to, the sort of, not just like, not the meme-ish like tankies and patriotic socialist Hodge cells. There's like that one woman, what's her name? They ratioed her, Brianna Joy. What's her name? The one, the Chomskyite. What's her name? The woman.
The one that used to do like the stuff for Standards, right?
Yeah. What's her name? Let me look it up. Brianna
Joy Gray.
Brianna Joy Gray.
She was the one that was yelling at Noam Chomsky forever ago, wasn't she? Her and that Bernie Sanders chick for talking about climate change when they should be talking about like police racism.
But now she's talking about how that the money should go towards the youths in America rather than fighting this proxy conflict. So yeah, it's very funny how the political left is really going through a crisis of its own legitimacy. But I don't know, maybe they'll, I don't know. Were you going to say Praise of Folly?
Oh no, I was going to say that this crisis of legitimacy you're talking about is basically, as near as I can tell, what has happened is leading up to 2011, which was Occupy Wall Street. You had this idea of the left is primarily concerned about economics. So they talked about, and that led to, with the Tea Party in 2008, some bipartisan talks with, like, say, Ron Paul about like auditing the Fed and reining in a lot of these financial shenanigans. But what's happened is, in the, say, 11 years since then, all the news outlets. So first of all, what happened was, in the Clinton years, they consolidated all the media outlets into like 3.
Yeah.
There used to be like over 20 plus news outlets running the country. They consolidated it down to 3. And so now that they're all in lockstep because of Clinton's deregulation, they all started shifting the narrative by bringing up, as early as 2011 and 12, things about like white privilege and all the typical woke rainbow stuff that we're used to. And what that does is it's completely antithetical to traditional socialist economic action.
Yeah,
so,
and a lot of them know it as well. A lot of them
know it as well. So, for example, the idea of a race as a proletariat is a fascist idea. It's literally fascism. Black nationalism with Marcus Garvey said that we were the first fascists. Now, again, that's baloney, but that's how fascist black nationalism is. And so if you have like, black nationalists, Hispanic nationalists, that's not kind of fascism. That's by the left's own textbook definition fascism. And they've been on their side for years. And then you have like proletariat vendors, same thing.
But now you have like the sort of like the gladio like element of it. I mean, well, okay, the political right, but this is my theory of wholesome Chungus nationalism when it comes to the blue-yellow conflict, is that and I guess this is what Brianna Greyjoy, that's what her point is that, you're screwing over people that are, domestic, for lack of a better term, ethno-narcissism, on the domestic front in order to support this nationalism in another country, across the continent, like in Europe, in Eastern Europe. So, that's like I think heading into the midterms, especially, that's like a big, I mean, we'll save it for now. I'm sure every single political channel. I might be on Patrick Casey's channel. Actually, you might also be there with the whole midterm stream. So, I don't know. We'll see what happens. But I don't know. I want to talk about the midterms because it seems that next week we're going to get the earful of it. It's going to be nonstop, nonstop with the midterms. So, anyways, let's go to Super Chats right now. Actually, before I cue it up, last minute shilling, boys. Go ahead. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I'm Todd Lewis of the Praise of Folly podcast. You can follow me on the Praise of Folly podcast, my Telegram, my Twitter, and my locals. You can also support me there directly at my locals and interact with the channel, make recommendations for future programs, etc. And I think, as you said, Gio, that's all in the description box. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No problem. And I'm going to Super Chats right now. So.
While you do that, as always, we do this every Thursday. Next week it'll be on my channel. Let's not cover midterm elections now that you think about it. We're going to get an earful of that, whether Pat Casey or the debuting of an upcoming project I've been a part of on November 7th. So there's stuff there that's going on. So stay tuned for that. And as always, this Saturday I'll be talking about deglobalization. I'll also be with our friend Ryan Turnipseed on his channel talking about atomization as well. And then there'll be quite a bit more writing projects for me in the future, whether it's at, my own Substack or I've been reached out to write for a couple of other places. So I've been kept pretty busy behind my keyboard. But, all my links are down in the description. Y'all's continued support helps me keep doing what I love to do, which is this stuff.
Nice. Ryan Turnipseed. All right. First Super Chat, and please get them in at the last minute. I know there's a pretty big one that tends to stop the other ones. But there we go. From HP Lovecraft himself, the ghost of HP. This is the real HP Lovecraft. He is spiritually manifesting into the computer, into YouTube. Hail Cthulhu as well. Hail Cthulhu. Thank you, HP Lovecraft. And for $1, Spartacus, this is my favorite name of all time, Spartacus Autisticus for $1. Didn't say, I love that term. See, he doesn't even have to type anything. He just has to, his name. And for 100 kroner, which I believe is this
Norwegian currency?
Norwegian, which I believe is $10.
Close to
$10. Thank you, Vingol. By the way, I made him a Janny. Vingol is the ultimate Janny of this thing of ours. Thank you so much for what you do. Vingol has the golden broom to everybody. While Lovecraft was a skeptic, he challenged that skepticism through his art and seemingly through thought we would have to escape into the safety of a new dark age from the horrors revealed by science. So yeah, I read that quote as well. So thank you, Vingal. Any comments on that, boys?
Yeah, Vingal's great. And yeah, that's a good comment where there's the idea of too much knowledge. A lot of this a good example of this kind of theme is Mickey Mouse's The Magician's Apprentice. He's playing with things he doesn't know what he's doing. And no, but unlike The Magician's Apprentice, there's no magician that can step in and fix it for us, because for Lovecraft, there's nobody over and above with better knowledge to stop this.
Yeah. And this one, I'm going to have to take my gum out. This is for 50 Crooner by Vingal, which I believe is $15 or $20. What is it?
No.
Oh my God.
That would be half that. So it's like $5.
Oh yeah. 50. Oh, that 100. Yeah. Sorry. For $5, Finality, please read this in Eldritch Growl. How do I say that? Nyarlathotep?
Nyarlathotep.
Oh, Nyarlathotep. The crawling. I am last. I will tell you all it's. I don't know. I'll try.
One thing I want to say.
That sounds more of like a faceless type of. So maybe I'll have to break out the Jeffrey Ficco. Yeah, boy. Yeah, there you go. That's a faceless one. There you go.
Well, one thing I wanted to say about the first super chat by HP Lovecraft is it's going back to Through the Gate with the Silver Key. It's the HP Lovecraft facet from our own age, because there's a Lovecraft in every age, right? Right. That's what we were told. There's a John.
So then it carries an even our dimension.
Yeah. Well, there's a Randolph Carter in every age of every species. Vertebrate, invertebrate. So this is a HP Lovecraft facet talking to us.
So there you go. It's kind of like Christian. There's every Christian dimensional merge and every different. No, I can't even bring myself to compare.
Somewhere out there in another dimension, there is a Christian that did find
interacting with the HP Lovecraft.
Yeah, who found a boyfriend-free girl, and we never knew about his existence.
Yeah, Chris CWC turned himself into an Eldritch Horror. So there you go. Sorry, herself. Sorry, YouTube. Herself. The Eldritch Horror. Sorry, YouTube. It's not Kiev. It's Kiev, not Kiev, and it's Hindu, not Hindu. $2 for Cringe Walker. Thank you, my friend. I should spell, just to piss people off, I should spell it with the D-O-O, the way that Kumaraswamy spelt it. But he had a right to, because he was Sri Lankan. So he had a right to spell it that way.
But Gio, you could just identify as a Hindu.
I thought about it at one point in my life, but years and years ago. I'm not even joking. $5 by Cringe Walker, a good friend Cringe Walker. Always donates to us, always donates to Patrick Casey. Not to shill 3-body problem ad infinitum, but it truly rediscovered the horror of some of Lovecraft's interdimensional masters. Look up Sophons? Yeah. Sophons. Is that how you say it? Yeah. Oh, any comment? Dead air. No.
Look up Sophons.
No idea who that is.
Look it up.
Was he inspiration to Lovecraft? Maybe.
Well, he's
but the 3-body problem.
Well, he's the bad guy of that book, the 3-body problem.
Okay. Yeah.
It's the Chinese science fiction story, a novel series called Remembrance of Earth's Past.
Oh, I heard about this. A lot of theory cells love this one. Yeah, the 3-body. I remember Logo talking about it. So, yeah,
the sci-fi book, the trilogy for the theory cells has finally come.
It's one of the theory. It's kind of like Infinite Jest, where it's one of those like theory cell picks. So, during the Cultural Revolution, why is it called the 3-body problem? I've heard of this, but I haven't. Yeah, I mean, I've seen Cringe Walker shill it before. I think he even shilled it on Follow the Rules. So, and for $10 by Reprobus, thank you, my good friend. I opened a Twitter spam us. What? Same username where I will post tweets, a post teaser clip leading up to what's that?
What's with the lead speak? What year is this?
leading up to, is that a erection? Like 3 Lovecraft. I also love cat.
Oh,
Lovecraft's
leading up to
cat.
release. Like Lovecraft, I
Oh,
also love cat.
yeah.
Here we
Wow.
go.
Thank you very much for $10.
Real quick, guys, real quick. Just a little bit of lore here, right? So Reprobus, that's the name of a mythical saint, Saint Christopher, who was
Yeah, it is,
supposed
I
to be
believe, yeah.
cynocephali, a dog-headed man.
Yeah, that's right. There's an Orthodox icon. I know Jonathan Pageau did a video on it. And once again, this is my best by Jay Ford. My God, I can't believe it. $100. Once again, here's $60, $30 for you and Matt, or 20 if you share with Todd. Kind of effed how they skim 30% off the top. I know it is. They do skim 30% off the top. So thank you very much once again, Jay Ford. You're an amazing bro. Wow, that's amazing. Maybe I'll give you a wrench as well. So
It's the highest one we've gotten yet on the show.
Yeah.
So you know what that means, Gio? That means you got to have me on again, because that's good luck.
Could be. Shameless shilling, just shameless.
He's the king of it. He's probably one of the best marketers out there. Praise of Folly.
Oh God. Here's one for Praise of Folly. $5 from Cringe Walker. William Sloane, Contemporary with Love. Oh, actually, someone else wrote a recommendation to you, Praise of Folly. William Sloane, Contemporary with Lovecraft, wrote a few great short stories in similar vein. I haven't heard of William Sloane. He must.
I've not either.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for the recommendation, Cringe Walker.
And he has another one for you. Folly for another $5. So I think we're up to $15 from Cringe Walker. Folly, you may enjoy Edison's Conquest of Mars, written as a sequel to War of the Worlds in the late 1800s. It has some amazing deep lore on Mars.
Well, that sounds amazing. Thank you.
Well, we know that there's the Ghosts of Mars. I always bring it up because it was one of my favorite films as a kid, Ghosts of Mars. I always have to say that when someone mentions Mars, I have to say Ghosts of Mars. So thank you very much, Cringe Walker. This has been amazing. Super chats have been great. Viewership has also been great. I know that Patrick Casey has Morgoth on his channel, I believe, as we speak. But here's another one for $5 from Cringe Walker. Fish people with Hebrew origins, terrible smell, transforming strange things at night. Okay, yeah, that can't, maybe I shouldn't highlight that one. Maybe it was.
No, but you see that Cringe Walker can say that because he's got the card to say that.
Oh, I see. I didn't know that about.
He's of the tribe, Gio. He's of the tribe.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so he has the right to say it. Oh God. Blue Elizabeth. King. Well, I don't see King Salmonfish in the chat. So we have another one. I have a need to sneed by Spasticus Autistic. That name just gets me every time. Spasticus Autisticus for $2. I have a need to sneed. Sneed those super chats. Thank you very much, my friend. Do we have any more? No, that's it for the super chats. Bro, wake up. It's 2009. I wish it was 2009. Welcome to 2006. My God, I would give anything to go back to 2006, okay? It's autism. Return to autism. Return. So this has been great, boys. Like I say, next week will be another Gifts Ungiven episode. I will come out either tomorrow or more likely Saturday with the mega rant on The Walking Cringe, The Walking Dead. So, and of course, next week's just going to be dominated by midterm news. Every single channel, listen, the Digital Archipelago, best stream in this sector, best culture show in this sector from the top on down. That's a Ralph reference right there. Everyone knows that. So
you do know, right, that he pointed it out in his last minute super chat, but it is a Blockheads reference.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, check his super chat.
Oh, the name is a reference to a song listened to for $2.
Ian Dury and the Blockheads.
Man, that's amazing. That's amazing. We love our Spasticus Autisticus, don't we, folks? We love him, folks. We love him. So 2 sweets coming. So any last minute shilling Praise of Folly, go and follow Praise of Folly. So
Yeah, well, I mean, I got regular content Monday through Thursday, every other Friday, and on Saturday. So plenty of stuff to see. And Prudentialist, you and I need to do a show again. The last one we did was a roundtable on China.
Yeah, we'll need
China.
to find some topics to hit up on because actually I'll DM you because I might have you on actually because I'm going to have a talk on deglobalization. We can have a panel discussion on it. But yeah, no, it's by all means go follow our friend here. His depth of historical knowledge is par excellence. So by all means, go follow him. His links are down below in the description. I'll be live on Saturday doing a doubleheader, both with Turn Up and my own show. I'll have articles later out tonight for patrons, and then I'm also going to have my fishing video available for patrons tomorrow. And then there's just plenty of writing for me to do, which is nice because next week I have more or less a lot of time by myself. I'm not going to be busy with too much, so it's just going to be me behind a computer with a lot of coffee. So we'll be getting a lot of writing done next week.
Yeah, and I also have to release something for my patrons in terms of writing, but yeah, so next week we promise Digital Archipelago will be on Prude's channel, and it won't be about, well, I guess we'll probably mention it. But
we'll have to talk about it, but I think you'll be with Patrick Casey, my own project that I'm working on. We'll be talking about the midterms.
Yeah.
It's going to be nuts. And I mean, if you want some more like American dissident focused stuff, I will just shill it here. There's a YouTube channel called The Old Glory Club that you should probably follow and give a watch to because
Wednesday,
Monday,
it's going to be right after. It's going to be
Monday, November 7th is when we debut, and it's going to have a lot of stuff going on. So if you're interested in history, if you're interested in just, a top tier moments of just Biden screwing this country over while being senile, it's all there for you.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I meant the 10th is going to be Thursday. So it'd be a few days after the midterm. So
yeah, well, maybe they'll be done counting by then.
Yeah. Oh my God. Maybe. No, maybe it'll be till Saturday on the 12th or so.
Yeah, maybe on Arizona, maybe.
It's gonna be nuts. I feel like you can just tell in the air that everyone's gonna be talking about it, like literally. So we'll see what happens. But thank you all. Thank you, Praise of Folly, for coming on. This has been a great stream. As always, God bless. Goodbye. Too sweet. Boom. There you go. Goodbye, everybody.
See you, gents.
See ya.